Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 24, 2024. President Joe Biden gives his final speech to the United Nations General Assembly as president, speaking of the remarkable sweep of history he has witnessed in 50 years in public service. And on the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, he says, even from the horrors of war, there's a way forward. Things can get better. We should never forget that. In Washington, the House Foreign Affairs Committee votes to hold Secretary of State Antony Blinken in contempt of Congress for not complying with subpoena to testify in the committee's investigation on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. House Speaker Mike Johnson again blames the Senate's lack of action on the annual government spending bills for the need for a temporary funding extension to avoid a government shutdown. Debate and vote on that bill expected in the House on Wednesday, and the Speaker promises there will be no Christmas omnibus spending bill. Justice Department sues Visa, saying the company has an illegal monopoly over the U.S. debit card market. Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, in a speech in Savannah, Georgia, promises companies low taxes and fewer regulations if they operate in the U.S. and high tariffs if they do not. The CEO of Novo Nordisk, which makes the weight loss drug Ozempic, testifies at a Senate hearing on the drug's high price in the U.S. Retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre testifies before a House committee, saying he did not know money he received from a nonprofit in Mississippi to help build a sports facility at his college alma mater came from federal welfare funds that should have gone to needy families. And a statue of the late singer Johnny Cash unveiled in the U.S. Capitol. Story from NBC News. In his last speech as president before the United Nations General Assembly, Joe Biden called on nations Tuesday to band together amid the spiraling conflict in the Middle East, Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, and growing global concerns about China's influence. Biden said, "I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history. The choices we make today will determine our future." Here's part of his speech on the Middle East.
We're also working to bring greater measure of peace and stability to the Middle East. The world must not flinch from the horrors of October 7th. Any country would have the right and responsibility to ensure that such an attack can never happen again. Thousands of armed Hamas terrorists invaded a sovereign state, slaughtering and massacring more than 1,200 people, including 46 Americans, in their homes and at a music festival. Despicable acts of sexual violence, 250 innocents taken hostage. I've met with the families of those hostages. I've grieved with them. They're going through hell. Innocent civilians in Gaza are also going through hell. Thousands and thousands killed, including aid workers. Too many families dislocated, crowding into tents, facing a dire humanitarian situation. They didn't ask for this war that Hamas started. I put forward with Qatar and Egypt a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's been endorsed by the UN Security Council. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war. On October 7th, since October 7th, we've also been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve. As we look ahead, we must also address the rise of violence against innocent Palestinians on the West Bank and set the conditions for a better future, including a two-state solution where Israel enjoys security and peace and full recognition and normalized relations with all its neighbors, where Palestinians live in security, dignity, and self-determination in a state of their own. Progress toward peace will put us in a stronger position to deal with the ongoing threat posed by Iran. Together we must deny oxygen to its terrorist proxies, which have called for more October 7th and ensure that Iran will never, ever obtain a nuclear weapon.
President Joe Biden speaking to the United Nations General Assembly at the UN in New York City, his final speech as president. NBC News writes that Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Monday that Iran does not seek a wider war in the Middle East and that such a conflict would have no winners. He told reporters during a visit to New York for the General Assembly, "We don't want a war. We want to live in peace. We don't wish to be the cause of instability in the region." President Biden ended his speech talking about his decision a few months ago to end his re-election campaign.
Even as we navigate so much change, one thing must not change. We must never forget who we're here to represent. We, the people. These are the first words of our Constitution, the very idea of America. They inspired the opening words of the UN Charter. I made the preservation of democracy the central cause of my presidency. This summer, I faced a decision whether to seek a second term as president. It was a difficult decision. Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most. Never forget, we are here to serve the people, not the other way around.
President Joe Biden giving his final speech at the UN General Assembly in New York City. He also had a one-on-one meeting today with the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and spoke at the Bloomberg Global Business Forum on climate change and at the Global Coalition to Address Synthetic Drug Threats, both forums meeting at hotels in New York on the sidelines of the opening of the UN session. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled with President Biden and also represented the United States today at a UN Security Council ministerial meeting on Russia's war with Ukraine, a meeting attended by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Politico reports House Republicans moved Tuesday to hold Secretary of State Antony Blinken in contempt of Congress over claims he obstructed their investigation into the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. House Foreign Affairs Chair Michael McCaul, Republican of Texas, had subpoenaed Blinken, requiring him to testify on Tuesday. But the Secretary of State responded he'd be in New York for events surrounding the UN General Assembly. Blinken reiterated, "I am willing to testify," but said he is profoundly disappointed by the committee's insistence on unilateral dates during which I am carrying out the president's important foreign policy objectives. That reporting from Politico. Here's Congressman McCaul chairing today's committee meeting.
Under the leadership of Secretary Blinken, 13 brave American lives were tragically murdered by an ISIS-K terrorist, and many more injured, and many Afghans killed as well. Rather than take accountability for this, the Secretary hides from the American people. He would prefer to hide rather than be before this committee today. The Secretary's willful indifference, his willful indifference, has brought us to this moment. I take no joy in moving forward to hold the Secretary of State in contempt of Congress. It's an extraordinary act. However, Article 1 of the United States Constitution entrusts Congress with the power of oversight and to legislate. Secretary Blinken's failure to appear violates that. It violates Article 1 of the Constitution. It violates our ability to perform oversight, and it violates our ability to legislate on a hugely important issue, perhaps the most important issue that occurred during this presidency.
Congressman Michael McCall, Republican from Texas, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, at today's meeting on the resolution holding Secretary Blinken in contempt for not complying with a subpoena to testify. Congressman Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, is the committee's ranking member.
You know, holding someone in contempt is a grave and rarely used congressional power meant for instances of real obstruction. All this is a rushed vote that undermines the seriousness of that power. It is objectively political in purpose, given that Secretary Biden has already willingly responded to questions on the Afghanistan withdrawal in 14 public congressional hearings since August 2021. And at the Secretary's direction, the State Department has produced over 20,000 pages of documents, made 15 department witnesses available for interviews, enabled members to view the July 2021 dissent cable on Afghanistan, and provided thousands of pages of interview notes from its own Afghanistan after action review. There is no obstruction here. That's cooperation. This is political theater. Secretary Blinken has engaged in good faith to reach a compromise on complying with the chairman's subpoena to testify again, including by providing alternative dates for his testimony.
Congressman Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee at today's meeting. And the vote to report the contempt resolution against Secretary Blinken was 26-25 along party lines. It goes to the full House. Again, from the Politico article, Secretary Blinken will be the third of President Joe Biden's cabinet to face a formal floor rebuke by the GOP-led House. Lawmakers held Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress back in June and impeached Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in February. The Senate swiftly dispensed with the charges against Mayorkas, and the Justice Department declined to prosecute Garland. That was from Politico. The White House put out a statement today in support of the latest House Republican drafted temporary government funding bill called the Continuing Resolution, or CR, to keep the government operating with the start of the new fiscal year, October 1st. And the CR under consideration would run until December 20th. White House writing, the administration calls for swift passage of this bill in both chambers of the Congress to avoid a costly, unnecessary government shutdown and to ensure there is adequate time to pass full-year, fiscal year 2025 appropriations bills later this year. House Speaker Mike Johnson today at a news conference also said he does not plan to roll together the annual spending bills into one, known as an omnibus spending bill, and pass it right before Christmas.
We have broken the Christmas omni, and I have no intention of going back to that terrible tradition. So there won't be a Christmas omnibus. As somebody asked me in the hallway a little while ago, will there be many buses? We don't want any buses. We're not going to do any buses, okay? We'll deal with that in the lame duck, and I'm going to plead, I'm going to urge the Senate to do their job. As Leader Scalise noted, they have not done that. This is Chuck Schumer's fault. It is not the House Republicans that we're in the position where we have to have a resolution to continue funding the government at the end of the fiscal year. We did our work. We passed 12 appropriations bills through the committee process in record time. We put them on the floor. Almost 73% of federal funding has been passed through the House. We sent it all over to the Senate, and they've done nothing. They did not one bill, and they would not negotiate with us on the top line. So here we are. We loathe CRs as much as anyone, but this is the situation that the Senate Democrat leadership put us in. It would be political malpractice to shut the government down. I think everyone understands that. And so we hope that this will get done quickly and we get everybody back home to their districts to work and to the campaign trail.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. Article from the Washington Post. On Sunday, Johnson introduced a 3-month funding extension called a Continuing Resolution, or CR, with additional crisis financing for the Secret Service, the result of a compromise with congressional Democrats to avert an October 1st shutdown. But the legislation does not include new voter registration restrictions that former President Donald Trump demanded ahead of November's vote. Without that measure, and every ounce of it, as the former president wrote on social media. Trump pressed Johnson to block new funding bills. That was from the Washington Post article. Speaker Johnson today was asked what Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee this year, thinks of the latest CR.
Speaker, have you spoken with former President Trump about this CR specifically, and has he approved it, given that he said he doesn't want a CR without the SAVE Act in it?
Yeah, no, what he was saying last week is the exact same thing that I was saying. He and I have been on exactly the same page. I saw a headline, I'm defying Trump. I'm not defying President Trump. I've spoken with him at great length, and he is very frustrated about the situation. His great concern is election security, and it is mine as well. It is all of ours. We are really seriously concerned about this, and we got to do everything that we can to ensure it. Congress, we passed the SAVE Act in the summer, and it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk collecting dust. That is maddening to us. He understands fully, President Trump understands the current dilemma and the situation that we're in, and so there's no daylight between us, and I keep him apprised all the time of everything that's happening because he is our nominee for president, and he's going to be the next president. So we'll continue working closely together. I'm not defying President Trump. We're getting our job done, and I think he understands that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at today's news conference. The temporary government funding bill that will come up on Wednesday for a vote will not be via resolution known as a rule to set House floor debate rules. That's because it's expected that enough Republicans would vote no on the rule to defeat it, along with virtually every Democrat. Instead, expedited procedures will be used, called suspension of the rules, or simply a suspension bill. It requires a 2/3 vote to pass, no amendments allowed. And that 2/3 means it's expected a combination of Republicans and Democrats will be voting yes to get that through. Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican of Florida, told reporters this morning why he will be a no vote.
Do you have any concerns about a December omnibus?
Of course. I do. Everybody does, because it's the same thing that this town constantly repeats. We do some massive spending bill right before Christmas that nobody ever really sees because the deal's been cut by the four corners. Well, for the American people, the leader of both chambers and the minority in both chambers, they cut some deal with the White House, and everybody goes home. And the problems persist in our nation's capital.
Oh, so you're obviously upset about a CR?
It's not even upset. I just know I can't support one. What I supported was last week's package for two very important reasons. First, Joe Biden's not running the country. We know he's not running the country. So why am I allowing his administration to negotiate spending for the next year in the United States? Absolutely not.
How do you think this reflects on Speaker Johnson?
He's in a tough spot. I think he's doing the best that he can. I really believe that. He's doing the best he can. He's in a tough spot. There's so many competing interests here on Capitol Hill and around the country. He's just trying to do the best thing in his mind and he thinks is right from all the things he sees from his perch as Speaker of the House. But I represent the people of Southwest Florida, and I already know what the people of Southwest Florida think about this.
Do you think come after the election he'll still have his job?
I don't know. I mean, I think so, obviously. I support the Speaker. But you know what? if anything is understood from the last couple of years around this place, is that nothing should be taken for granted. Take it easy.
Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, speaking with reporters this morning outside the House Republican closed-door meeting in the Capitol. House Democrats also held a caucus meeting this morning, and some of their leaders later held a news conference. Pete Aguilar of California is the caucus chair, was asked about the government funding measure.
Are you expecting the majority of Democrats to vote in favor of the CR tomorrow? And also, have there been any concerns that have been brought up for maybe some members who are not sure if they're going to vote yes or no?
We haven't whipped it to my knowledge. Catherine Clark would be the one to answer that question. But clearly, for a suspension, we need 2/3. So we're going to need a significant number of Republicans. Our belief is that by Speaker Johnson doing this, that he has the Republicans to pass the bill. So we'll work in a bipartisan way to make sure that this gets done.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat of California, the caucus chair at a news conference. If the House passes the CR on Wednesday, it goes to the Senate, which will take it up perhaps as early as Wednesday. Deadline to prevent a government shutdown is in 1 week, October 1st. Politico's Sarah Ferris posting on X a change in the House schedule this week, saying Dem leaders told members in the caucus Tuesday it was very likely the House would leave tomorrow after the government funding vote. Per two sources, folks worried about Florida storm disrupting travel. That storm is the approaching Hurricane Helene, and leave means until after the November election. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana, later confirmed it on the floor. No votes Thursday or Friday in the House. Wall Street today, the Dow up 83, NASDAQ up 100, S&P up 14. From Bloomberg, a senior executive for cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike Holdings Incorporated apologized at a congressional hearing on Tuesday for a disastrous content update that crashed millions of computers around the world. Adam Myers, senior vice president of counter-adversary operations, appeared before the House Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection to answer questions about the July 19th outage, which paralyzed airports, banks, stock exchanges, and businesses around the world. The incident crashed the computers of CrowdStrike customers who used Microsoft Windows. That was reporting from Bloomberg. Here is Adam Myers.
Despite our strong track record, I'm here today in part because just over 2 months ago, on July 19th, we let our customers down. CrowdStrike was in the process of updating our customers on a new threat, but released a content configuration update for the Windows sensor that did not work as expected. This resulted in Microsoft system crashes for a number of our users. On behalf of everyone at CrowdStrike, I want to apologize. We're deeply sorry, and we are determined to prevent this from ever happening again. We appreciate the incredible round-the-clock efforts that our customers and partners who, working alongside our teams, mobilized immediately to restore systems. We were able to bring many customers back online within hours. I can assure you that we continue to approach this with a great sense of urgency.
Adam Myers is Senior Vice President of Counter-Adversary Operations at CrowdStrike Holdings, testifying before a House subcommittee today. Again, from the Bloomberg article, the company is facing legal action from shareholders and possible legal claims from Delta Airlines, whose operations were significantly impacted by the update glitch. The Justice Department, writes Fox Business, on Tuesday filed a lawsuit against Visa, alleging that the company maintained an illegal monopoly over the U.S. debit card market. According to the DOJ's complaint, more than 60% of debit card transactions in the U.S. run on Visa's debit network, which allows the company to charge over $7 billion in fees each year for processing those transactions. It also accuses Visa of illegally maintaining its monopoly power by insulating itself from competition. That was from Fox Business. Attorney General Merrick Garland led the news conference at the Justice Department.
Earlier today, the Department of Justice sued Visa for violating Sections 1 and 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. We allege Visa is a monopolist in the debit transaction markets that is violating federal antitrust law and inflicting often hidden but significant harm on American consumers and businesses. Visa operates the largest debit network in the United States. A debit network facilitates the electronic transfer of funds directly from a consumer's bank account to the merchant's bank account in a retail transaction. Millions of Americans prefer to use debit transactions, which are often the primary option for lower-income consumers without a credit card. In the United States, over $4 trillion of debit card transactions take place every year. Over 60% of those transactions and over 70% of all online debit transactions are routed through Visa's electronic payment network. According to Visa's own calculations, it is insulated from competition for 75 to 80% of debit transactions initiated with a Visa-branded debit card. We allege that to maintain this monopoly power, Visa deploys a web of unlawful anti-competitive agreements to penalize merchants and banks for using competing payment networks. At the same time, it coerces would-be market entrants into unlawful agreements not to compete by threatening high fees if they do not cooperate and promising big payoffs if they do. The result is a debit market where Visa has unlawfully amassed the power to extract fees that far exceed what it could charge in a competitive market. Merchants and banks pass along those costs to consumers, either by raising prices or reducing quality or service. As a result, Visa's unlawful conduct affects not just the price of one thing, but the price of nearly everything.
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department today in Washington. Turning to the presidential race, this from the New York Times, former President Donald J. Trump told supporters in Georgia on Tuesday that he would take manufacturing jobs and factories from other countries if elected in November. In a speech on economic policy, Mr. Trump said he would do so by lowering corporate taxes, slashing regulations, and granting, quote, free access to American markets for companies that made products in America, although many economists believe the tariffs he's proposing would burden lower-income Americans. Mr. Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris continue to grapple over the economy in key battleground states, with Ms. Harris expected to amplify her own economic message on Wednesday in Pennsylvania by attempting to weave together her various economic proposals into a broader thematic message. That was the article from the New York Times. Here is Donald Trump in Savannah, Georgia.
So as your president, here is the deal that I will be offering to every major company and manufacturer on earth. I will give you the lowest taxes, the lowest energy costs, the lowest regulatory burden, and free access to the best and biggest market on the planet, but only if you make your product here in America. It all goes away if you don't make your product here, and hire American workers for the job. If you don't make your product here, then you will have to pay a tariff, a very substantial tariff, when you send your product into the United States. And by the way, you know, for years they knocked the word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word. One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears. A lot of bad people didn't like that word, but now they're finding out I was right. And we will take in hundreds of billions of dollars into our treasury and use that money to benefit the American citizens, and it will not cause inflation, by the way. And you know, I took in from China hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes and tariffs, and I had no inflation. We didn't have any inflation, 1.2%. We had essentially no inflation. Now, you've had, over the last 4 years, you've had the highest inflation, I think, in the history of our country. Somebody said, no, sir, it's only 58 years. Well, that's pretty bad, too. I think it's really in the history of our country. This is the policy that built America, and this is the policy that is going to save America. It's going to save us, because we have gone so far down in so many different ways, not to mention the border, not to mention 21 million people pouring in from places unknown, totally unvetted. But like I've always called it, because it's a very beautiful and simple term, it's called America First. We're putting America first.
Former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, at a rally in Savannah, Georgia today. A Newsweek article on this event has this. He also promised today to work with the state's governor, the Army Corps of Engineers, and transportation officials to quickly deepen the port in coastal Savannah. The Republican nominee promised to quadruple traffic to the port as your power will lead you to a manufacturing boom. Trump said with a world-class port and a world-class workforce, the city will soon become one of the premier export hubs anywhere on Earth. As mentioned earlier, Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, plans to talk about her economic plans Wednesday in Pittsburgh. Also some word, she'll visit the U.S.-Mexico border on Friday in Arizona, talking about immigration policy. Today, she did an interview with Wisconsin Public Radio, and one of the topics was abortion.
Now to abortion. You've said you want to work with Congress to pass a federal bill to codify abortion rights. How do you plan to get enough support in Congress to restore abortion rights when you'd likely need to pass a Senate filibuster? You'd have potential legal hurdles.
Well, let me first say to all your listeners, you must reelect your Senator Tammy Baldwin, because we need the votes in Congress to do exactly what you are saying, and that's true. And it is well within our reach to hold on to the majority in the Senate and take back the House And so I would also emphasize that while the presidential election is extremely important and dispositive of where we go moving forward, it also is about what we need to do to hold on to the Senate and win seats in the House. That being said, I've been very clear. I think we should eliminate the filibuster for Roe, and we need and get us to the point where 51 votes would be what we need to actually put back in law the protections for reproductive freedom and for the ability of every person and every woman to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, in a Wisconsin public radio interview. New CNN poll among likely voters nationwide. The CNN poll conducted by SSRS finds 48% support Harris and 47% Trump, a margin that suggests no clear leader in the race. CNN writes about 2% say they plan to vote for Libertarian Chase Oliver and 1% for Green Party nominee Jill Stein. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policies debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from Axios. The chief executive of the company behind Ozempic and Wegovy blamed insurers and middlemen for the high cost of weight loss drugs in the U.S. during a congressional testimony on Tuesday. Lars Frugaard Jørgensen, who leads drug manufacturer Novo Nordisk, passed along accountability for access to these medications while being questioned about his company's role in setting prices. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, chair of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, last week outlined concerns that the high cost of these drugs could bankrupt Medicare and increase insurance premiums to unaffordable rates. For Ozempic, Americans pay about $969 per month, compared with $59 in Germany, $71 in France, $122 in Denmark, and $155 in Canada, Sanders said on Tuesday. Wegovy costs $1,349 per month in the U.S., nearly 15 times as much as it costs in the United Kingdom, he said. That was reporting from Axios. C-SPAN covered this hearing. Here's Senator Sanders questioning Lars Jørgensen about the reason for the high prices.
Under your best case scenario, the price you are charging Americans for Ozempic is still nearly $600. That's with all of the rebates and all of the discounts. That's over 9 times as much as people in Germany pay for the product. And the price you are charging for Wegovy to Americans is over $800, nearly 4.5 times as much as it costs in Denmark. So very briefly, and a number of people are going to be asking you questions, please tell me why you think it is appropriate to charge Americans 9 times more for the same exact product that you sell in Germany. And by the way, correct me if I am wrong here, but I assume that when you sell Ozempic for $59 a month in Germany, you are making a profit there. Am I correct on that?
So, Senator, let me start by acknowledging and sharing your wish to have affordable medicines for Americans. And there's been a number of numbers mentioned here, and I think it's important to say that these are not comparable data. When I mentioned that it's really, really important for us to secure access to patients and affordability, we are hard at work in making sure that patients have access via the insurance schemes. And today, 80% of all Americans with insurance have access to these medicines at $25 or less for a month's supply. So it's a price point at the pharmacy counter we have to talk about.
Let me just interrupt you if I might. Okay, you're correct that many people pay $25 a month for Ozempic, but what you're forgetting to mention is that many of those people are paying outrageously high prices for the insurance that covers Ozempic and other drugs. So simply this is a pass-through to the insurance companies. Bottom line is you are charging the American people substantially more for the same exact drug than you are charging people in other countries. And my question is, why?
So, Senator, I appreciate the question. Let me try to explain how I see it. We launched Ozempic in 2018. We have had it on the market for some years. During those years, our price has declined by 40%. I mentioned that patients with insurance have access to the $25 or less for 80% of the cases. And if you look in this period in Medicare where there's broad coverage, premiums have not gone up. In the same period, the insurance companies and their PBMs, the big conglomerate of legal entities they have more than doubled, actually close to tripled their profit. So the fact that we can actually secure that 99% of people with insurance have access, that there's a copay at the pharmacy of $25 or less without premiums going up in Medicare, while profit goes up for the middlemen, I think is a concerning data point.
Well, I would simply say that most Americans would be surprised to learn that insurance rates are not going up. In my state, they're going up by 14%. But once again, you are not answering my question.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, questioning witness Lars Jørgensen, Novo Nordisk CEO. Roll call covering this hearing writes that the ranking member, Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, acknowledged that if the company didn't profit on their products, there wouldn't be incentive to further innovate. He said there is a tension between the need to incentivize innovation and the ability to afford that innovation, and we are here struggling with that balance. You can find the video of this hearing in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. A government investigation into last year's rollout of the new free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, writes an article at Inside Higher Education, found that Education Department officials failed to properly test and prepare the form and launched it despite signs that it was not ready for wide release, an oversight that proved disastrous. The department has already delayed the form's launch for the 2025-26 application cycle to December in order to make time for testing, which is set to begin next week. GAO officials warn that the next FAFSA is at risk for similar delays and technical issues because of systemic problems in the department and the Office of Federal Student Aid, the agency that oversees FAFSA. That was from Inside Higher Education. The U.S. House Subcommittee on Higher Education held a hearing today with GAO officials. Here's Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican of Wisconsin, questioning Melissa Emery-Aris, GAO Education, Workforce, and Income Security Director, about these findings.
Can you provide examples of technical problems that made it hard for students and their family to complete the new FAFSA? And do you think these are fixed by this year?
Right. There are a wide variety of problems. For example, if you were born in the year 2000, you simply couldn't proceed. You could not complete the FAFSA if you happened to be born in the year 2000. That was fixed, but that was not fixed until March. There are other issues in terms of signatures disappearing. If you go back to a saved application, the student's or the parent's signature could disappear, rendering it then incomplete, and that has still not been resolved. There are other issues with parents not being able to contribute information, parents not being able to move past certain screens. There are also issues with incorrect information being provided. Graduate students are falsely told that they are eligible for Pell Grants. This is not true, and this is not resolved.
Okay. What technical support options did you offer students when they encountered a problem?
Education's main support was its call center. However, most people could not reach call center representatives. About 3/4 of calls went unanswered.
Okay. In your press release yesterday, the department said their call center received a, quote, unprecedented number of calls after the FAFSA was launched on December 30th. Given that the department knew families would be filling out the updated FAFSA for the first time, did you prepare your call center to answer these questions, or did they maintain at least the same number of staff as the last year? Did you bring in extra staff for the end of the year?
The Department of Education vastly underestimated the need for call center staff. And as a result, they vastly understaffed the call centers.
Okay. As students continue to encounter significant technical issues, were the department's proposed workarounds for the litany of bugs effective, would you say?
Although we didn't assess the effectiveness of the workarounds, I can tell you that students weren't always told about their workarounds. Oftentimes, students were told, exit, try again later, but they were never then told when a workaround was developed. And it might have taken several months for a workaround to be developed. And in the meantime, students could have been going into the application and just trying and coming across the same barriers. It was not helpful for students.
Okay. Are there any of your proposed workarounds you'd like to highlight for the benefit of the committee?
There was one workaround in particular that instructed students with a parent who lived abroad to falsely put in a U.S. address in order to contribute information to the FAFSA.
Melissa Emery-Aris, Government Accountability Office, Education, Workforce, and Income Security Director, questioned by Congressman Glenn Grothman, Republican from Wisconsin, at a House subcommittee on higher education hearing. Politico writes that Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, in a public letter ahead of the hearing, defended the agency's efforts and assured higher education leaders that the form is on track for its full December 1st launch. He said, as we transform this process, we are leaving no stone unturned to learn lessons, fix problems, and improve processes. He detailed the Federal Student Aid Office's modernization efforts, plans to strengthen its leadership team, and boost staffing at support call centers by more than 80%, among other updates. That was from Politico. Retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre, a Hall of Famer, testified today before the House Ways and Means Committee in Washington about misuse of federal money for needy families. Favre received $1.1 million from a nonprofit in his home state of Mississippi, money he used to help his college alma mater build a new sports facility. But the nonprofit used money it received from TANF, the federal Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. Favre said today he did not know until it was brought to his attention about what TANF even was. Congressman Jason Smith, Republican of Missouri, the committee chair, asked him about it.
As this committee considers reforms to the program, can you tell us when you first learned what TANF was, and since going through all of this, the concerns you have about the program as it exists today?
Yes. April, maybe May of 2020, I was actually on a golf course with my brother and 3 other friends, and our phones started going crazy, and people were asking about Shad White, who I had no idea who Shad White was, and said, "What'd you do to him? He's saying, that you involved in TANF money," and I had no idea what TANF was, had never heard of it, and was completely caught off guard by this press conference. And if not knowing what TANF was, and later finding out that it is welfare money, I returned the money ASAP, no questions asked. And no one from Shad White's office ever came to me prior to this press conference that he held and asked me any details or specifics in regards to my involvement. And so we filed a defamation lawsuit against Shad White, and in that lawsuit, his top chief auditor, in her deposition most recently, said that the truth, finding out the truth, was quite frankly, was not important. She just wanted to close out her audit. So she didn't do any, it's unbelievable, but that's when I found out, was 2020.
the concerns you have about the program, what are those concerns today?
Well, I'm here because there's obviously a problem. First and foremost, I think a big problem is a lot of people don't know what TANF is. Never heard of it. We have to educate people on what TANF is, but we have to implement guardrails and guidelines and be strict on how the money is supposed to be used for a lot of reasons. Most importantly, so those families can get the money that they need in situations like myself or people are in similar situations who are trying to do good and are caught up in quite frankly, a mess. This doesn't happen to them.
Retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre testifying on Capitol Hill before the Ways and Means Committee, questioned by the chair, Congressman Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri. Shad White, that he referred to, was the state auditor in Mississippi who uncovered nearly $100 million in TANF fraud in the state. Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reports, though Favre repaid $1.1 million in speaking fees that were deemed improper, he is part of a lawsuit filed by the Mississippi Department of Human Services seeking to reclaim additional funds, namely close to $730,000 of interest.
When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son.
Folsom Prison Blues and other hits from the late Johnny Cash played today in the U.S. Capitol building. An AP article reads that Johnny Cash now stands among the most famous politicians, trailblazers, and activists of American history, as he became the first professional musician to be honored with a statue in the Capitol. Congressional leaders from both parties and members of the Cash family were among the several hundred guests who gathered Tuesday for the unveiling of the statue. They shared their memories of a man who grew up on an Arkansas cotton farm and turned a love of music into a decades-long career that gave voice to the struggles and triumphs of everyday Americans. That's how Associated Press put it. One of the speakers today, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Republican of Arkansas.
When Cash visited Folsom Prison, his most famous line was all Man in Black bravado. I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. But Johnny Cash also used to say that he was two people. Johnny is the nice one. Cash causes all the trouble. It's not hard to imagine that he too looked out at that prison crowd and saw a version of himself staring back. Johnny Cash was open about the struggles and the triumphs in his life. He was a hymn-singing Christian, but there were also times when he wrote that he felt like a walking vision of death. But that didn't contradict his image. It was his image. Cash's first big hit was called I Walk the Line. In an era when most musicians' images were carefully curated, he was open about straddling the border between clean-cut Johnny and cast-down Cash. When so much in today's world is fake, Johnny Cash was very real.
Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the unveiling of the Johnny Cash statue in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Each state gets two statues in the Statuary Hall collection. A few years ago, the Arkansas legislature voted to replace the existing statues of two people who represented the state in the 19th century with Johnny Cash and civil rights leader Daisy Bates, who mentored the 9 black children who desegregated the Little Rock Central High School in 1957. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.